Hello, students. What about limited liability companies? What are those? Well, they're kind of the new kid on the block. They've been around for a few years now, but they were created by state legislatures and they exist only by state charters. And they are kind of a hybrid between a corporation and a partnership. And to some extent, arguably, they have the best of both worlds, so the best benefits of both a corporation and a partnership. Because an LLC, a limited liability company, has a shield from liability similar to the shield of being incorporated. But an LLC does not require the same corporate formalities as a corporation. You don't have to keep a corporate minute book. You don't have to have annual meetings of the shareholders or the board of directors. You don't have to do those things. If you don't have to do them, then you can't mess them up. And you're a lot less likely, it's easier and cheaper to maintain, and also less likely to lose your shield of liability for failure to maintain corporate formalities. So an LLC is kind of a hybrid between a corporation and a partnership. To form an LLC, you have to create articles of organization, somewhat similar to the articles of incorporation you would form for a corporation, and you have to file those with the Secretary of State's office, and you have to pay an annual fee. So to that extent, it's similar to incorporating. Once you have had your articles of organization issued by the state, however, you have your charter and you are a limited liability company. You are not required to prepare a set of corporate bylaws, although many LLCs do create an operating agreement by which they create rules to maintain some sense of order within the company and how we're going to run this company, but you're not required to do that. You don't have to have annual meetings, and so you're a lot less likely to mess up the formalities, but investors, when they invest in an LLC, they do not buy shares of stock. You don't call it stock. They buy memberships. So this often shows up on a test because it's a way of distinguishing between a corporation and an LLC, a limited liability company. You buy memberships. You don't buy shares of stock. One of the other big advantages of an LLC is you can elect to be taxed either like a corporation, where the money gets taxed twice as it comes through, or like a partnership or a sole proprietorship where the money as it comes in feeds right through the business entity and only gets taxed once. So for a small startup business, this tax advantage could be a significant factor in deciding to form an LLC. An LLC is a legal person, a lot like a corporation. It can sue or be sued. It can enter into contracts and it can own property. One potential problem with an LLC is it's regarded to have citizenship in every state in which any of the members are a resident. So this creates a problem with jurisdiction and getting into the federal court, where sometimes in order to have jurisdiction to get into the federal court, you must have complete diversity of citizenship. We'll talk about that later in the course. Is a LLC membership like a stock certificate? Is it a security, which requires a Securities and Exchange Commission registration or exemption? Well, it depends upon whether or not the person who owns the membership is also participating in the operation of the business, but sometimes, probably often, limited liability company memberships are securities, and you do have to either register with the SEC or make sure that you have arranged your investment plan in such a way that you qualify for an exemption from SEC registration. LLCs can be what are called member managed, where there's only a few people owning all of the memberships, and so they run it like partners run a partnership. Or it can be manager managed, where they've delegated the management decision making to one or to people. So let's review quickly the advantages and the disadvantages of an LLC. Advantages: you have liability protection, like being incorporated. Tax-wise, you can choose to be taxed either as a corporation, where the money gets taxed twice, or as a partnership, where the money only gets taxed once. And you have substantial flexibility with regard to how you operate the business, because you're not required to maintain corporate formalities, and you're less likely to lose your liability shield because you can't mess up formalities you're not required to keep. Those are advantages. Disadvantages: LLCs are still kind of a new kid on the business block. They've been around for a number of years now, but because they exist by they exist by a state charter, and the state legislatures enacted the LLC laws, there's a little bit of lack of uniformity in what constitutes a valid LLC, which will protect you from liability in one state. If you go and do business in a different state, you may not have met the requirements, and you may not have liability protection. So lack of uniformity in the laws regarding LLCs from one state to the next is still a potential problem. And if you're going to do business in more than one state, you want to make sure you're complying with the state LLC laws in every one of those states. And finally, if you do elect to be taxed on the money once, you elect to have it feed right through the company and be treated like your personal income tax, well, the IRS may charge you with a self-employment tax on that income, and that adds another 15% plus to the amount of income tax that you have to pay on that money. So that is a potential disadvantage also. So those are the major advantages and disadvantages of a limited liability company. But overall, because of the relative simplicity in operating and maintaining it, and the potential tax advantage and the shielding from liability, it has become a pretty popular form of business ownership for small startup companies.